She called security on him at 9:47 in the morning. Sloan Merritt, vice president of strategic partnerships at Caldwell Defense Group, pointed one finger at the man standing near the registration desk and said, loud enough for the whole atrium to hear, "Remove him. He clearly doesn't belong here." No hesitation, no second thought. That was just how Sloan operated. The man she was pointing at was tall and broad-shouldered. He had on a faded navy t-shirt, jeans pale at the knees from too many washes, and work boots that had been around long enough to show it. He was holding a paper coffee cup from the gas station down the road. To Sloan, he looked like someone who had walked in from the parking lot by mistake. What she didn't know, what she had no way of knowing, because she hadn't bothered to check, was that this man had approved the wire transfer that funded the entire summit 3 weeks ago, that he'd read every technical brief submitted by every company in this building, that the letter folded twice in his jacket pocket was a $3 billion acquisition offer already signed, and that the company named on that offer was Caldwell Defense Group, her company, the one she'd been working 14-hour days to keep alive. But none of that was visible yet. What was visible was the security guard, frozen, glancing between Sloan and the tall man who hadn't moved, hadn't reacted, just stood there watching her with the quiet attention of someone who already knew how this ended. Sloan looked certain, completely certain, like she was doing exactly what needed to be done. She had no idea she was ending her own career, and she had no idea that 3 people in that building had been waiting months for exactly this moment. Some mistakes don't come out of nowhere. They build up quietly, over years of being right, until the day when that certainty is the most dangerous thing in the room. The Pacific Northwest Aerospace and Defense Innovation Summit ran every 2 years at the Cascade Summit Resort, just outside Portland. Big space, 54,000 square feet of concrete floors and floor-to-ceiling glass, the Columbia River Gorge laid out behind it. 700 attendees, each one screened before receiving an invitation. Dinner was $2,800 a plate. The actual deals got made in the hallways, not in the sessions. For Caldwell Defense Group, this summit wasn't optional. It was a last shot. Richard Caldwell had spent 30 years building the company into a respected mid-tier defense contractor. Avionics, targeting software, guidance integration, work that didn't get written up in magazines but kept things running and accurate. For a long time, that was enough. Then the industry moved on without them. Autonomous systems, AI targeting, drone coordination. Caldwell's clients were asking for things the company couldn't deliver for another 3 years at minimum, and another $400 million it didn't have. Competitors already had those capabilities on the shelf. In the 12 months before Portland, Caldwell had lost 2 contracts worth $680 million combined. They'd cut 340 jobs. Their private valuation had dropped by almost a third. The only real option left was a strategic acquisition, someone coming in with capital and technology before the clock ran out. That's where Sloan came in. Caldwell had brought her on specifically for this summit. Her job: find the right people, get the right conversation started, make the company look like an opportunity rather than a distress sale. She was good at that job. 12 years in corporate development, 4 of them focused on defense sector M&A. She knew how to read a room. She knew where the money was before anyone said a word. The problem with that kind of skill is what it can do to your blind spots. Get good enough at reading certain signals, and you stop seeing the ones that don't fit the pattern you already expect. Chris Hemsworth got to the Cascade Summit Resort at 8:15, 90 minutes before the first session. He drove himself from Portland in a rented Subaru, parked in the general lot, not the valet lane. He'd stopped for coffee at the gas station on the exit ramp. He always did that at events like this. Something about having a cup of gas station coffee in a room full of $400 espresso drinks settled him. He was 42. Though he'd spent enough time on the Pacific coast that it felt like a second home. He wore what he usually wore: faded navy t-shirt, jeans, work boots he'd had resoled twice. There was a good jacket in the back seat of the Subaru, but the morning was mild and he didn't bother with it. The one thing that didn't quite fit was his watch. Heavy Swiss movement, plain white face, no markings. He kept his sleeve pulled down over it most of the time anyway. People who knew him would have trouble describing what made him hard to read. It wasn't confidence exactly, and it wasn't the opposite. more like someone who'd stopped needing other people to confirm what he already knew about himself. He moved through the atrium without looking around to gauge how he was landing. Sloan clocked him and moved on. Nothing useful there. That was the first mistake. The second came 40 minutes later, during the pre-session networking window. Sloan was covering the room systematically. 2 evenings of prep work, the full attendee list cross-referenced against acquisition targets, likely buyers, procurement officials, defense-focused venture firms. Color-coded notes on her tablet. 47 specific people she needed to reach before the day ended. The man in the faded t-shirt wasn't on the list. She noticed him twice in 20 minutes. The first time he was standing at the technical demonstration tables. 11 minutes, just watching. He didn't look at the label cards. He went straight to the hardware, ran 2 fingers along one of the casings near the alignment ports, like he was checking something specific. Marcus Webb, Caldwell's chief of avionics integration, the engineer who'd built that prototype, went still when he saw it. He leaned in slightly, his mouth opened, then closed. He didn't say anything. He watched the man walk away. The second time was in the far corner by the windows. The man was talking to James Larkin, former deputy director of the Defense Innovation Unit, now a partner at one of the most connected defense-focused private equity firms in Washington. Sloan had spent 2 months trying to get a meeting with Larkin. That meeting was scheduled for next Tuesday. She watched this man in worn jeans talk to him like they'd known each other for years. Larkin laughed at something, then handed over his card with both hands, the way you hand someone a card when you actually mean it. Something tightened in her chest. She told herself he was probably an academic, a researcher, maybe, someone's +1 who'd wound up in the wrong conversation. She moved on. The third miss happened at the mid-morning break. She was passing the espresso station when she caught a piece of a conversation between Marcus Webb and one of the junior engineers. He knew the calibration protocol by subcomponent, Webb was saying, voice low. Not just the overview, the actual alignment configuration. I've been running that setup for 2 years. It's nowhere in any public documentation. There's no reason a civilian should know it exists. The junior engineer frowned. Who is he? Webb shook his head. No idea. But he's not here for the cheese plates. Sloan heard it. She stood there a second, then kept walking. She decided he was probably a well-connected hobbyist, the kind of guy who reads too many technical white papers and knows how to sound credible at industry events. Enthusiasm wasn't authority. She had 47 real conversations to get through. She logged it, did nothing about it. That was the actual mistake, not what she did 2 hours later in front of everyone, but this. The moment she got a real signal and chose to ignore it because it didn't fit the picture she'd already built. She was about to find out how much that choice cost. The first standoff came at 11:14. The main session was restricted, Tier 1 credentials, no exceptions. Sloan was at the auditorium entrance with her tablet, running checks. The man in the worn jeans walked up at 11:14. He had the gas station cup in one hand. He waited without any particular urgency, the way someone waits when they're not worried about the outcome. His badge said C. Hemsworth, organization listed as independent. She saw the Tier 1 access marker next to his name and processed it as a data entry error. Excuse me, she stepped in front of him. This session is restricted to verified industry participants. Independent category attendees are in Hall B. My access is listed right there on the badge, he said. Independent designation doesn't cover Tier 1 sessions. Hall B, East Corridor. He held her gaze for a moment, then nodded once and stepped back. He didn't go to Hall B. He found a seat by the window, sat down, and made a call. 4 minutes and 12 seconds. She couldn't make out any of it. When he hung up, he just stayed there. Both hands around the coffee cup, not moving, not checking his phone, not doing anything that suggested he was particularly bothered. Sloan watched from across the room and felt something close to relief. Handled. What she didn't know was that the call had gone to the CEO of Meridian Aerospace, Caldwell's most important potential acquirer. He'd listened, said he was sorry to hear about it, and that he looked forward to talking with Chris and Bozeman the following week. The thing had already started moving. She just couldn't feel it yet. The blow-up came at 11:31. There's a specific failure mode that tends to show up in competent people. When they've been right for long enough, public certainty stops being a tool and starts being a reflex. They don't check anymore, they perform. When she spotted him back at the auditorium doors at 11:28, she had options. She could pull the master access list. She could walk 30 feet and ask James Larkin who this guy was. She could look more carefully at that badge. She didn't do any of those things. She walked straight toward him like the matter was already settled. I thought I made myself clear. Her voice carried enough that people nearby stopped their conversations. She was aware of the audience. That awareness made her louder, not quieter. She gestured at him, the t-shirt, the jeans, the boots, the cup, in a way that made her meaning obvious without her having to say it plainly. This is not a public exhibition. The people in this room have earned their access. You clearly don't understand what kind of event you've walked into. The atrium went quiet. Not the polite kind of quiet. The kind that means everyone just realized something is happening that matters. Chris looked at her for a long moment. Then, same flat voice he'd used the first time. I have a letter in my pocket. You should read it. A letter. She almost laughed. Then James Larkin was beside her. Sloan, we need to stop. I have this handled, James. You don't. He turned to Chris. I'm sorry about this morning. Chris shook his head. Don't worry about it. Sloan looked back and forth between them. Something cold moved through her that she couldn't quite name. Show her the letter, Larkin said. Chris pulled a folded document from his jacket and held it out. She took it. Her fingers weren't entirely steady. She read it. Then read it again. Hemsworth Capital and Strategic Partners. She knew that name. She'd spent 3 weeks mapping potential acquirers before this summit, and that firm was at the top of her list. Deep pockets. Strong defense sector relationships, exactly what Caldwell needed. The offer on the page was addressed to Caldwell Defense Group. $2,300,000,000. 90-day close, subject to due diligence. Signed C. Hemsworth. Independent. The man she just publicly dismissed twice was the only person at this summit who could actually save her company. She stood there holding the paper while people streamed past her into the 11:30 session. She didn't move. Somewhere behind her, a glass got set down on a table. A small, ordinary sound that for some reason was the last thing she clearly registered. What followed, Chris would piece together over the next few hours, had been building for a long time before that morning. After the session break, Larkin pulled him aside and said there were people who wanted to talk. Not about the acquisition. The first was Garrett Ossie. He'd been Caldwell's director of business development for 6 years before being let go the previous February. Officially, restructuring. What actually happened? About Sloan's practice of steering analysts. She didn't like into dead-end accounts and then documenting their poor performance as their own fault. 9 days after he filed, he was gone. He'd kept the documentation, 3 years' worth, on a personal drive. He'd been waiting for a situation like this. The second person was Diana Price, systems integration consultant now, but formerly a senior engineer at one of Caldwell's partner firms. At a joint project review in Seattle the previous March, Sloan had suggested in front of 11 people, including Diana's own clients, that the technical recommendations Diana had prepared might not actually be hers. Diana had never worked with Caldwell after that. 14 months rebuilding a relationship that had taken 4 years to earn. The third was Marcus Webb. Webb had been watching it for 2 years, he told Chris, standing in the hallway with his hands in his pockets. She decides who belongs and who doesn't based on a picture she's already made up. Then she acts on it. I never said anything because it wasn't happening to me, and because my team depends on this company staying afloat. He paused. But when I saw her do it to you, someone she clearly couldn't read at all, I thought maybe it was worth saying something. He looked at the floor. Should have said it earlier. Something about who Chris was before the money matters here. Spring of 2009. He was 25, living above a machine shop in Byron Bay in a room barely big enough for a bed and a desk. The company he'd started 2 years earlier, borrowed capital, second-hand server, 2 people including himself, was in the middle of its first serious contract dispute. A larger defense electronics firm had decided a young Australian with no track record had no business winning a government integration tender. Their lawyers sent a letter questioning whether his company had standing to fulfill the contract. Their procurement lead called to suggest he withdraw before things got awkward. He didn't withdraw. 4 months, 18-hour days. Sleeping on a cot in the office because going home was time he didn't have. He built a guidance calibration prototype to a spec the larger firm had publicly called unachievable at his budget. Delivered it on time, under cost. The government evaluator wrote in his assessment that it was the most technically refined submission he'd reviewed in 6 years. The larger firm lost the contract. 2 years after that, Chris bought them. He still had the cot, folded in a storage room at his Portland office. Not a keepsake, just useful sometimes. The watch had come from the evaluator who signed off on that first contract, a plain-faced Swiss movement, no brand markings, handed over with a note that said good work. Chris kept his sleeve down over it most of the time. He didn't need anyone else to see it. Richard Caldwell came down the corridor at 11:47, moving fast, the look on his face that particular expression of someone who's just been told exactly how bad things are. He stopped in front of Chris and didn't look at Sloan. "Mr. Hemsworth, I've been told what happened this morning. I want you to know it doesn't reflect." Chris raised one hand, just slightly, not unfriendly. "Mr. Caldwell, I came here because I was genuinely interested in this deal. I spent 3 days on your technical documentation. I talked to your avionics team this morning, and I was impressed." He let that sit for a beat. I was close to being ready to move forward. Caldwell's expression didn't change, but something behind it shifted. "The letter I brought represents $2.3 billion. That letter is withdrawn." The hallway was quiet for a moment. Caldwell glanced at Sloan, one look brief, back at Chris. "What would it take," he said carefully, "for you to reconsider?" Chris took a moment. 2 weeks. "I need to find out if what happened today is one person's problem or a company-wide problem. Those aren't the same thing." He nodded toward Garrett Oze standing by the far windows, toward Diana Price next to him, toward Marcus Webb a few feet back. "There are people here who can tell you things your VP has been making sure you never heard." Caldwell followed the line of his gaze. When he got to Oze, something moved across his face. He recognized him, and something in that recognition looked like shame. 2 weeks, Mr. Caldwell." Chris turned and walked out, and his boots were quiet on the polished floor. Outside, the afternoon air was mild with the beginning of a drizzle. He walked to the general lot, got into the Subaru, put his hands on the wheel. He didn't start the car. He sat there watching the rain collect on the windshield, thinking about 2009 and the phone call telling him to withdraw, thinking about Webb's voice in the hallway, the particular flatness of someone who'd held something back for a long time and was finally putting it down. Thinking about the engineers at Caldwell who knew that work the way you only know something after years inside it, and who'd been quietly shuffled into corners by someone who decided they didn't fit. He had other deals, cleaner situations. No one was making him do this. The rain picked up a little. He started the engine and turned left, back toward Portland. What happened to Caldwell Defense Group over the next 72 hours was fast and thorough. By Thursday, Caldwell had called an emergency board session. Through Larkin's firm, the board received a full summary of what had been going on. Ose's documentation, Price's account, Webb's 2 years of HR observations that had been filed away without anyone acting on them. Sloan Merritt was terminated Thursday at 4:30 p.m. under Section 12. 4 of the conduct policy, conduct detrimental to material business relationships, with a written notice citing 3 specific incidents. No severance beyond the legal minimum. Her keycard stopped working while she was still in the building collecting her things. The following Tuesday, 2 institutional investors holding a combined $94 million in Caldwell equity contacted the board requesting an emergency governance review. They didn't use inflammatory language. They didn't need to. The message was clear. Something had been allowed to go on for too long, and they needed to know what was changing. By Friday, Defense Horizon ran a story under the headline, "Caldwell Partnership Crisis Signals Deeper Culture Questions at Pacific Northwest Contractor." Sloan's name wasn't in it. It didn't need to be. Richard Caldwell sat in his office that Friday evening with the papers in front of him and didn't look at any of them. He was thinking about Garrett Oze. 6 years with the company, filed a complaint, gone 9 days later. And Richard had never seen the complaint, had never known it existed. He'd hired Sloan to find the right people. He'd never told her what right meant. He hadn't built what happened to Oze and Diana Price, but he had built the company where those things could happen quietly, for years without reaching him. That, he understood now, was the same thing. Chris called Caldwell on a Tuesday evening, 11 days after the summit. "Your technical capability is real," he said. "Webb's calibration work is as good as anything I've come across." He paused, but Sloan Merritt wasn't the problem. She was what the problem produced. This company has been sorting people by the wrong criteria for 15 years and calling it standards. Caldwell didn't say anything for a moment. "I know," he said. "I'll make you a different offer. 2.1. The $200 million difference goes into a fund, externally audited, governed by a board that includes Webb and 2 people from your engineering staff, not your executive team. It funds advancement for technical talent that's been overlooked. People who have the skills and haven't had the visibility. A beat. This isn't charity, Mr. Caldwell. If the best people in that building have been invisible for years, then I'm paying 2.3 for a company that's operating well below what it's capable of. The fund is how I find out what I'm actually buying. That's not a standard acquisition condition. It's the condition. Take it or don't." Long pause. "Accepted." The deal closed on a Thursday, 93 days after the summit. No press at the signing, no photographer, just the paperwork. At the all-hands meeting afterward, Caldwell spoke to his 360 remaining employees for longer than anyone expected. He didn't talk about growth projections or integration timelines. He talked about Garrett Ossie, about what it meant that a 6-year employee had filed a formal complaint that the founder had never seen. His voice held steady. His hands on the lectern didn't quite. Chris stood along the wall in a charcoal jacket over a plain t-shirt. When Caldwell introduced him, he shook a few hands nearby. That was it. Later, he found Webb in the hallway outside the avionics lab. "The calibration demo," Chris said. "How long to get it ready?" 6 weeks if we push. 8 if we don't. Push. I want to be there." Webb nodded. "Then, can I ask you something?" "Go ahead." "That morning, when she turned you away, why didn't you just show the letter right then and end it?" Chris picked up his coffee from the workbench shelf. Gas station, same chain, different city, and turned it in his hands before answering. "Because it shouldn't matter," he said. "What I can offer someone shouldn't be the reason they treat me decently. Those are 2 different things, and I don't want them to be the same thing." He looked at the prototype casing on the shelf. "The people in this building, most of them have spent years getting passed over by someone who looked at them the way Sloan looked at me. The difference is they couldn't pull out a letter at the end of it." He met Webb's eyes. "That's what the fund is for." Webb was quiet. Then, for what it's worth, the cheese plates at that summit were actually excellent. Chris looked at him, then laughed. "Short, unguarded, the kind that just comes out." "Yeah," he said, "they were." Sloan spent the first month after her firing working with an employment attorney on a wrongful termination case. The attorney eventually told her it wouldn't survive the documented evidence on Ossie's side. She settled in month 2, signed an NDA, and moved to a smaller city on the coast. 6 months later, she was at a mid-sized firm working directly with technical teams for the first time in her career. Engineers, analysts, junior developers. People she would previously have managed from a distance through intermediaries. One afternoon in a project review, a junior analyst named Devin Marsh presented a systems integration framework. He was 26, wore Nike Air Force Ones to every meeting, had gone to a state school most people at the firm had never heard of. The work on the screen was sharp. She saw it immediately, not because she was looking for it, but because the logic was genuinely clean and she knew what that looked like. She stopped him mid-slide. "Devin, walk me through the redundancy layer. How did you get there?" He looked up. Caught off guard, he walked her through it. It took 11 minutes. When he finished, the room was quiet. She said, "That's the strongest systems reasoning I've heard in this building." She meant it. She wasn't managing him. She was just telling him what was true. Small moment. Didn't fix anything that had already happened. But it was the first time in a long time she'd looked at someone and just seen what was in front of her. The Cascade Summit Resort still has an espresso bar near the main entrance. The cheese plates are still good. Every 2 years, 700 people come back to that building. The concrete floors, the big glass windows, the river in the distance. And somewhere in the room there's usually one person who drove themselves, parked in the general lot, and brought their own coffee from a gas station on the way in. The watch is under the sleeve. It always is. If you've been sitting with this one for a while, if some part of it landed somewhere, drop a comment. Tell us where you are. We read them. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. Hit like, subscribe, and come back. We'll keep going. This is a fictional dramatized story created for educational and inspirational purposes. All supporting characters, businesses, and events are fictional. Any resemblance to real persons other than Chris Hemsworth is coincidental. Narration is AI assisted.